I was born into darkness. My mother was 13 years old when she met her biological father. She had no idea that her father was a pedophile. My mother went to visit her father over the summer of 1978, and when she came home, she was pregnant with me. I was born to a 13-year-old little girl, so my father is my grandfather. I was conceived in sin, conceived in darkness. What I was born into was just as traumatic. My entire childhood was one form of trauma over another. Dealing with sexual abuse from my mother's older boyfriend, his son, who I would be left with for him to babysit me. He would sexually molest me, and he would use religion to do it. He would tell me that I would go to hell if I did not perform, and then he would bribe me with food as a prize.
What religion, there's no religion that says that's okay. This is real unfortunate what happened to this lady and her mom. Imagine meeting your dad and he has sex with you, he raped you, he molests you, get you pregnant. So now mom is already messed up. So now you see why she had this baby. Now she got this baby, which is her, in a messed up situation too, as though now she's being abused by other people around her. This is sad, but don't no religion says that this is okay. What people do, they like to manipulate what things are being was said and use religion to try to justify things, but it's not the religion, it's the people. Nonetheless, it's still fucked up.
Performing. And I would always want my mother to ask, as the many times she caught him giving me prizes, I would want her to ask, what is that for? But she never did. My mother ended up separating from that man. She went from one man after another. I had begun to be the babysitter. I was 8 or 9 years old, being left at home for days at a time with a 4 or 5-year-old and a toddler. And then
mom was fucked up. Mom was traumatized. But I don't know if it's just from the molestation or whatever that her mother was doing. Like, this is what we mean by generations of trauma, and we bring kids into this, and it just trauma begots trauma begots trauma.
Getting penalized via a beating if something was not right when my mother came home. I began to act out sexually because of the molestation, obviously, and I would always seek out older boys to let them touch on me. And there was one in particular, and in this situation, I know that it was nothing but the hand of God who was protecting me from trauma that I would not have been able to overcome. But I remember leaving my sister and my brother, going down to his house with my friend, and we were both getting into trouble together. We tried to go to this young man's house so that him and his friend could do whatever we allowed them to do. And it was only by the grace of God that a gentleman that my mother knew came down the street and said, "Get your butt back home before I call your mama." I knew, nope, I'm caught. I'm going to get a beating out of this world. I'm going back home. For about 1.5 years, I endured beating after beating after beating after beating, tumultuous beatings. Extension cords were her weapon of choice. She would beat me profusely to the point to where my skin would be black, blue, and purple. And I was getting a little bit older, and I was just like, I can't take this anymore.
And you know, this is a double-edged sword here because, you know, nowadays we don't hit our kids, right? You know, you could get locked up. Back then, you know, you was able to do more and get away with more. And it wasn't cell phones, so you could just call the police. Everybody have cell phones. But this is why these laws are in place for people who abuse their kids. Like she said, she was beat profusely. Black and blue. Mom leaving days at a time and leaving her home with kids as a kid. And thank God it wasn't a fire, a burglar, or anything else that could have harmed these kids. But they already messed up. Already messed up. And the men that she constantly bring around her kids. That's why, like, even if you're, and the sad thing, the protector, the dad, and I got 2 daughters. The protector, the dad, was the one who violated her mom. So imagine how mom look at men. And her father is her grandfather. That's crazy. And now she's hot from being molested. They say that the sexual, in some cases, that people who get molested, they reenact it. So you see her looking for older guys and stuff like that because her mom boyfriend used to molest her and give her treats when she would perform. They left her out there with no rescue, no other men in the family, no uncles or whatever, no aunts, no grandma to come in there and swoop and rescue this lady. We got to protect our kids, man. And it's sad.
Me for a God that I did not even believe existed. One night, my mother was beat so bad by her then husband that I think that night something finally clicked in her head. And she actually tried to fight back. She pulled out a gun and she tried to shoot him with it, but he pulled the gun from her hands and he beat her with it and threw the gun away. Why is my mother so weak? Why is she allowing this man to beat her? The morning after the beating, my brother and I were arguing because he wanted me to iron him a different pair of clothes, and he was at the bathroom door yelling at me. My mother's husband heard the argument. He went to my mother yelling at her, and she came into the bathroom with that extension cord and she gave me a beating that was by far the worst beating that I had ever received. Looking back on it now, I now know and understand that the beating that I received was the beating that she wishes she could have given him for the beating that he gave her the night before. I was just done. My body was bleeding. I was bruised all over, welts forming up on my body. But the emotion that I felt as I was running out of that house to get on the school bus was different from any emotion I'd ever felt after a beating. Everybody got picked up in front of their house. And as I'm on this school bus in searing pain, and I had it made up in my mind that if I went back to that house, I was going to find that gun and I was going to either kill them or they were going to kill me. And I remember saying to God, if I go back to that house, something is going to happen. I got into my first hour class, my geometry class, with Mrs. Burnside, a white teacher. But I built a rapport with Mrs. Burnside and Mrs. McGraw, the other white teacher. Out of all the teachers in the building, they were the only two that I actually trusted with my truth. Because my mother's husband was a major drug dealer. His entire family were major drug dealers, and everybody knew it. So the Black community, even in Michigan and Mississippi, were terrified of this man. But I knew that if I was able to just share my truth with Mrs. Burnside, that something would happen. So
that makes more sense in a sense. Women be out here in general looking for the guy, the flashy guy, the guy that's getting all the money, you know, the killers and gorillas. And she in this situation that's toxic where, you know, she went from toxic relationship to toxic relationship. One where sexual abuse and abuse to the kids, but molesting the kids, and now she's in a situation where she got a man just beating on her, and mom probably feel like she deserved that because of her childhood trauma. Now you left because he's somebody in the streets. This girl felt like she had nowhere to go to as though like these women be in these abusive relationships to as though he told her to beat them like that, or her like that. It's sad that women get in these relationships and they be so connected to these men, they don't know how to leave, or they're afraid if they leave, he's going to kill them, or he's a stalker, he got guns, and he won't leave me alone. He will violate the restraining order. He comes up my job. We have, as a society, and this still happens, we have to protect our women. And women, know the red flags when you're dealing with people. You messing with a guy, you know, but he say he got kids, but he don't have no relationship with him, and you got kids. Even if you didn't, that's a red flag. You're not dealing with him. Oh, he pulled up in this nice car, but he ain't got no business suit on, right? But he got not some money in his skinny jeans or whatever, and his hat turned to the side, and he just coming from the block. That's a no-no. You don't know what made him who he are and how it's going to be and what trauma you're going to absorb from him and his stress with his life was fucked up. And now you're going to make yours a living hell because whatever his daddy didn't do and his mother ain't do because he was raised by his fucking grandmother. This is the real world, and it's all different type of scenarios that we could keep going to different personalities, but we got to know to get the fuck away from there. This lady father is her grandfather. And then she let you know how her childhood was with a mom who was raped at 13 by her father. It's so, where's her mother? And now you see the life of debauchery, that all the decisions that mom was making and how it affected these kids, and how, for whatever reason, she kept putting these kids in these situations that led up to this.
Wrote her a letter, and after class, I stuck the letter under her book and I walked out and went to my next class. And within minutes, she was at the door with tears in her eyes talking to Mrs. McGraw. And they called me and they said, "We're taking you to the office." CPS was called. They just asked if they could look at my body, and I said yes. And I'm standing with my back turned to them as they're looking at my body and they're taking pictures. And even now, 30 plus years later, I can still hear the sniffles and the tears and the cries and the way that they were trying to muffle the sounds of their cries from looking at my body. I ended up in foster care that day. My story will only reach a certain amount of people. Your story will reach others. Your story will help others heal. If you start talking, if you start sharing, you will start to realize that you are not alone. Don't let the enemy keep you bound. We are more together than we are alone.
Man, shout out to you, and I'm sorry that happened to you. I'm sorry you had to go through that. And I'm glad you're in a place where you healed and you can help people heal, because we need more people to speak out on this, because it's people that still to this day is living, that's their life. They're living that right now. They're living that right now. It's kids living that right now. It's little boys being molested by mom's boyfriend right now. It's little girls being molested by mom's boyfriend right now. Being beat by mom's boyfriend right now. Being beat by dad's girlfriend and all kinds of weird stuff. We gotta protect our kids. And you can't, and I hate to say this, but a lot of times, if that man ain't raised this baby when he was there with her when she was little, don't send her over there to him. It be odd how people don't grow up together and they be their own blood and there's sexual attraction for some fucking weirdo ass men. Don't never feed your kid to the wolves. Never.